Hello.
Hi, Chetan. Good evening.
Welcome. Very good evening. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm good.
All right. Okay, so we'll give it 10 to 15 seconds. People will slowly start joining in.
Yeah,
So I'll give a short introduction about you, and then you can start.
sure.
All right, Chetan, we can start now.
Sure.
Okay, so, hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. So today we have Chetan, who is the Senior Manager of UX Design at ServiceNow. So before this, he was the Director of UX Design at Hacker Earth. So to give a quick one-liner about Chetan, he's a UX designer by day and investor by night. So Chetan, the stage is yours.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm just setting up my screen. Just give me a second if you could.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks so much for the introduction. And hello, everybody. Hope you're all doing good. It's a little weird. It says conference/webinar. I don't know, but I don't get to see any one of you. Let me get started. Let me share my screen and we can get started from there. All right. So myself, I'm Chetan. As Gautam has just mentioned, I've been working with ServiceNow for a good year and a half as a senior manager for product design, heading their India ITX division. And before that, I've been part of many small and large organizations, both startups, of course, in the SaaS, especially the B2B space, and then some of them in the consumer space as well. So diving deep into the presentation, a disclaimer before we get started. So first, here not here to enlighten. This is more about things that you're probably doing consciously or subconsciously, especially subconsciously probably are doing. I'm just trying to bring them up, to your conscious side of your processing, so that you can think through them proactively while making decisions. Right, and also touch upon few points on the UX journey through the startup, through in the startup space. This is primarily for founders and product managers. You will know why I'm saying that, and we can get straight in. Right, agenda. So I'm not sure if we need an agenda for 20 minutes talk, but if you insist, I have one. So we are going to talk about challenges while merging UX into your organization. And the reason why I'm saying merging UX into the organization is because typically UX tends to join a little later into the growth of a startup, and we'll talk about that as well. And then we'll talk about certain elements that we need to consciously balance on a day-to-day basis. Of course, there will be a lot, but we'll talk about a few of them. Right? So before we get in, quickly, if you could comment in the comment section, I'd probably be interested to know what do you think is the most important part in the success of startup among these 9 things? These are just randomly chosen 9 things, but what do you think? I wish this was more interactive, but that's okay. So here, my take on this is everything is important. The key to the success is balancing between all of these things and other things that are probably not there on this particular slide. Right now, having said that, let's go into the various stages of a startup that Forbes has put together. And we'll talk about why these 5 stages and why I'm bringing up these 5 stages. Right. Technically, it is problem discovery, solution hypothesis, where you're conceptualizing, brainstorming with your partners or investors. Then you go into this problem solution fit, trying to see if your solution makes sense to your users. Right? and going to the market fit is somebody willing to pay for your product, and then finally into the growth stage. Right? Now, if you have to map the UX process, the traditional UX process, where the 5 stages of a startup, right? So this is how it probably is going to look like, right? So problem discovery is a lot about research, talking to users, interviews, documenting them in the form of mapping, affinity mapping, journey maps, task flows, and personas. While solution hypothesis is a lot about brainstorming, discussions, concept testing, coming up with new concepts, right? Moving on, it's all about clickable prototypes, experience walkthroughs with your end users or customers, trying to see if there is value in what you're planning to build. And then comes the build and test phase, which is you actually have a product, you're trying to see if it can generate some revenue, if it has some value. And while you're working on it, the organization is maturing. This is the phase where the organization actually matures. There will be more teams as such as marketing, sales, UX, proper engineering with QA and proper processes. Right, all of those things will be coming into place during this phase or just before this phase, right? And finally, the growth phase, where you'll be doing all of these things, but your vision for UX is going to be much longer than half a year or 1 year at best. Right. So this is a quick, mapping of what it is if the UX process has to be mapped to the startup growth or startup cycle. Now, moving on, the challenge here is most startups do not have a UX designer or UX expert as part of their founding team, or not their first employee for sure. Right? Typically UX joins just before product market fit phase or at the stage of product market fit, right? So we would have skipped all of these other phases. Um, uh, Technically not skipped, but we would have done it as a startup. You could have done some of these interviews and everything, but you might have missed on documenting them in the right way, or following the UX process of concept validation, things like that, right? So what do we do, and what happens because of this, right? So it's never late. You can always create those user roles. Always, while you're hiring UX designers during the product market fit, have some room, have some space, dedicate some time before they get tactical with the projects at hand. Let them invest some time on some of the strategic documentation, if I have to say, right? Because these become your anchor points. Every time you are at crossroads, every time you are trying to invest time in decision making in terms of design A versus design B, feature A versus feature B, prioritization. These are some of the things that will help you make those decisions with some level of arbitration, with some level of what you say is rationalization. Right? So please make sure you have these. You give your UX designer some time. Of course, you have to time box, and you time box it and make sure these things are put together. Right. Moving on. So what is it merging of UX means, right? What are some of the challenges that every organization faces? I have to put it in three things. One is UX takes time. The second one is bringing UX is going to disrupt things within your team. Of course, UX designers might end up disrupting the product, the industry, the market, and everything, but still, they will for sure disrupt to a certain extent your existing team and processes, right? And finally, collaboration. How do you collaborate? Because so far you've been building things. Now there is a new member in the team. With this new member, what do you do about it? So let's talk about these three things one by one. UX takes time. Yes, it does take time. And why does it take time? It takes time because the research that you have done, the connect you have established with your end user needs to be redone by this UX designer as well, right? The reason is this individual, he or she, or this particular team is going to establish the UX practices, the UX guidelines for your product today, tomorrow, and the future. So it's very essential for this particular practitioner to have similar and, if possible, better connect with your end user along with your stakeholders, which is what we'll discuss in the next slide. So with your end users, as in when you're talking to your end users, you have a connect, but a UX designer, or for that matter, anybody in the organization cannot build a product by themselves, right? They still have to work with other members in the organization. So that's the reason why it's very important for UX designer as well to establish those things, develop that empathy towards other stakeholders, understand their goals, understand the perspectives they have towards this problem, towards this market, towards the business, right? This helps to collaborate. This helps the UX designer to understand what the other person, what lens the other person is viewing at this problem or the solution, so that when they're collaborating, they're already thinking about these things when they're solutioning, when they're coming up with concepts. Moving on, disruption. So why do UX designers, why do organizations feel like UX designers tend to disrupt their mechanism or their already set processes of functioning, right? Number one, they question the decisions that are already taken because they need to understand why a decision has been taken, right? In that case, you should seek the data, why they're questioning, what made them feel that they should know about this, what made them feel that this decision is probably wrong, right? And then have a healthy discussion rather than justifying no, right? Listen, it's okay to question, but time box, prioritize once again after those discussions. New processes. UX person has come into the picture now. Obviously, there is a new process that they will bring in. So how do you merge, figure them out, right? There will never be a set process saying, okay, this is what it is. Every organization will figure out on their way as they mature, they will figure out what is the best UX process for them. For that to happen, you need to, as an organization, you need to let the UX designer or let the UX design team play a certain role in vision setting, play a certain role in terms of capturing insights and understanding the insights. Doesn't matter where they're coming from, business insights, marketing insights, or coming from UX research team, right? Make them understand the tech limitations, be it the tech stack, be it the code base on which you're operating, be it the database limitations that you have, right? Help them understand the limitations and the capabilities as well, right? And discuss and prioritize whatever vision statements that you're making or the goals or the milestones that you have. Right? We will talk a little bit more on the UX changes. Now that they have said about all of these things, they will start proposing changes. Hey, this needs to be changed, that needs to be changed. How do you make decisions? What needs to be changed and what can wait? Right? Number one, if it is in line with your vision, please put in that effort to make those changes, if not straight up, right, in bits and pieces. Right? If it is adding value to the user and if it's an immediate value to the user, go ahead and make those changes. I understand you don't develop V2s on a very early stage. You want the V1 to take your organization to a certain stage, right? So that's where the do not change. When do you not change? When it is too much of a change compared to the value that will add, do not make those changes, right? It's absolutely important to communicate and make the UX designer understand to make sure the future collaborations are smoother, right? Moving on, collaboration. How to improve collaboration? What are some of the challenges that we face with collaboration, right? Everybody is solutioning. Everybody is a designer. I believe everybody is a designer, right? Everybody is trying to problem solve for your organization, especially in startup, more than anywhere else, right? So let others wireframe, but let the final designs be done by the UX designer. That's their responsibility. That's their role. They're trained. They're professionals. That's what they're good at, right? Design decisions by others are good, but involve your UX designer when those things are happening, right? Bring them up to speed why this is happening. Get their inputs when this is happening. Try and avoid taking design decisions in the absence of UX designers. Market research is not the same as users. Reiterate it, right? Let the UX designer do some amount of research, or at least give them access to user research that is already being done if it is, right? Customer interviews do not compensate for user interviews, right? So user is different, customer is different. Customer is also a type of user. Customer is the one who pays, user is the one who uses your product or service. So make sure you understand, the UX designer understands that, make sure you give that room for your UX designer. This is probably the most important thing. UX designer should be aligned on all of these 7 aspects of your organization: the vision, the intermediate milestones that lead up to your vision, and the immediate goals, which are extremely tactical projects that your team is working on, right? And the process in which these particular features, functionalities, or products are going to be released, right? And a framework to make decisions, framework to prioritize features, right? And finally, the backlog, right? An alignment with your UX designer on all of these 7 aspects is extremely important. If there are friction points, if there are disagreements, please put in some time to sort them out. Right. So finally, what does all of these above challenges when solved, what does this result in, right? So UX designers will be involved in 3 types of projects of any startup. One is a vision project. What is the larger vision? This one will help the entire organization to come together. If the vision could be driven by the CEO, the engineering, the marketing, the sales, could be driven by anybody, but involving the UX to get a visual of the product will help bring the entire team together. So involve your UX designer and vision setting. And current projects, which are extremely tactical. When the UX designer is working on current projects, make sure there are 2 sets of solutions. One that is plausible experience, which is what we could do, which is what we could deliver given XYZ constraints, time constraints, platform constraints, resource cost constraints, whatever, right? And finally, what is a mixed experience? Add this back to the product backlog. At some point, you will end up revisiting these things, right? And finally, the other documentation that designers typically do for scalability of products, right? Which is design systems, person libraries, scenarios, and other flows diagrams, as we discussed earlier. Now let's look at some interesting aspects of how there are various things that US co-founders, product managers, engineering heads, or a member of any startup for that matter, you're trying to balance consciously or subconsciously. I'll just add a few points about these interesting opposing thoughts of school that we try and balance on a day-to-day basis. Consistency versus context. I think this is probably the most subconscious thing. Everybody talks about consistency, but there is always context that has to override consistency as an undergrad, especially when consistency is introducing any element of learning curve or any element of failures on a task completion, right? So maintain that balance. We'll talk about what balance is a little later. Qualitative versus quantitative research, right? We all talk in terms of average. On an average, there are 50% of users are clicking on this button, right? That is good enough. But why are 50% not clicking? So your quant has to be backed up by your call. Quant only tells you what's happening on a screen or what's happening during a flow or what might end up happening or when and where in the flow is something happening. Qual will help you understand the why behind those things, right? And once again, it's a cycle, right? Your quant will help you validate the whys that you get out of your qualitative research, right? So it's a cycle. So keep that in mind. Not one. So surveys are not the answer. Asking the user is not the definitive answer to your questions. Also, every time you're doing research, keep the 4 quadrants in mind: the known knowns, the known unknowns, the unknown knowns, and finally the unknown unknowns. The 4 quadrants, because things will keep moving from one quadrant to the other quadrant. Sometimes what you thought as your known knowns can move into your known unknowns because there's a new question that has come, right? Keep a track of that matrix in your head, and keep changing things as your research proceeds or as you keep moving in your product development. Excuse me. Moving on. Intuitive experiences versus introducing learning curve. What is intuition? Intuition is something that people pick up over a period of time after using new things. If you remember back in the 90s, when the web 1.0 or whatever you want to call it, there were these GIFs, there were these flashing buttons, because people need to understand, hey, this is interactive. That means this is something that you can click on to get to know something. It would explicitly call out click here too, right? The reason was not that they didn't have a better understanding of verbs, taking advantage of verbs, right? But The reason was pretty simple. People need to understand what is clickable on an interface. Today, intuition has come to the stage where people know when they look at an interface what is interactive and what is not. So we don't have to work on it. And over a period of time, this learning curve decreases and things start becoming intuition. If we only stick to intuitive experiences and not shy away from learning curves, we will never be able to introduce the next gen innovative solutions that are required. And every time we speak of learning curves and everything, always keep these things, these 4 incompetences and competencies in mind, right? Map this unconscious, conscious competence and unconscious competence to people learning to walk. As a child, people crawl. That is unconscious incompetence because they don't know how to walk. They need to move, but they don't know, so they pull their body somehow, right? Conscious incompetence are those baby steps that they take. They know that they can use their legs to move, but they still haven't perfected it, right? That is conscious incompetence. And then comes conscious competence, right? Now, as a child, we all know how to walk, how to run, everything. We know how to move. Unconscious competence. Now, I don't think as much while I'm moving. I'm looking at my mobile phone. I'm probably looking at a hoarding on the board at someone else while walking, right? I'm not conscious, but I'm competent when it comes to walking, right? So why is this important? Imagine you're building a B2B SaaS product, right? So conscious competence is something that you have to especially keep in mind. Imagine a new employee coming into your customer's organization, right? They now have to consciously learn about it and then get through the rest of the stages. A new customer, on the other hand, is probably going through the unconscious incompetence, right? So figure those things out where you fit, because each of these phases have their own abilities and the limitations that will empower your users in terms of getting all this curves. The next one is data-driven versus instinct-based design, right? What is it? Should we always go with data-driven designs and not really with instinct? Just like intuition, instinct is also something that's gained over a period of time with experience, right? It's not really magically coming out of thin air, right? So one has to question their own instincts. Where is it coming from? Try and uncover the data or the reason behind it. And if the data is not strong enough, call it out so that the team and yourself can go ahead and validate that instinct if it is extremely strong, right? So balance, once again, the data-driven versus instinct-based designs. Jugaad versus scalability, right? So Jugaad, as we know it in India, is extremely popular. But having said that, Jugaad is not scalable, and this is something the person who introduced this terminology to the global management world is now arguing. He's written a book about it where he's talking about how Jugaad is not scalable. Jugaad is trying to get rid of a problem with the available resources for now, right? So it's not scalable. You still have to work on it to make it scalable. If it means you have to completely take a different turn to make it scalable, that's what it is. So balance that out. That doesn't mean you'll always go for scalable solutions, never for Jugaad. Go for Jugaad, but always keep in mind that sometime you'll have to revisit to make it scalable. And customer versus user. Customer data, customer feedback is not always technically user feedback. It's very important that we distinguish customer and user as two separate groups. Customer is the one who pays for the product, especially in a B2B environment, while user is the one who is using the product or your service, right? Collect feedback. If it is tough to get to the users, there are mechanisms where you can collect feedback from the end users through the product, so rely on them. There are smart nudges. Let's say a user hasn't used a search feature for a good 3 months. Smart nudge at the bottom right or left corner saying, hey, you haven't searched anything, and you search, you've been only browsing. Can you give us good feedback why you're not doing it, right? So use smart nudges, intelligent nudges to gather feedback from within the product, from the end user, rather than asking customer for feedback on every feature and every aspect of your product. And now, finally, continuous improvement versus systematic innovation. Continuous improvement is, those features, the product backlog that we are chasing and everything, right? What is systematic innovation? Can innovation be really systematic? Yes, it can be if you're targeting your efforts towards a single problem. Prioritize your problems. Look at not just the product backlog, which is a bunch of features, maybe. Also look at the pain points, right? Look at the pain points, prioritize them, and create some sort of hackathons once a year, if possible, right? To go ahead and systematically innovate within your product for problems that the customer or the end users are facing. So this is it. Final thoughts. So once again, like I said, balance doesn't always necessarily mean 50-50. 50-50, it could be 80-20, 70-30, 99 or 1, right? So just like a cycle, right? Imagine UX is one pedal and the rest of the organization is the other pedal, right? One has to go up, the other has to go down, and it is a continuous thing. That's when the cycle moves. In the same way, it could be UX or it could be any other function of your organization versus the rest of the organization. At some phase, you'll have to prioritize one versus the other, and that's when things will start moving, because the resources, times are limited in a startup, right? So that's a quick takeaway, probably from my presentation today. Any questions, any answers at this point? We'll be happy to talk about that. Gautam? Sure.
Yep, thank you so much for that, Chetan. That was a really informative session. Yeah. So personally, I don't have any questions. And yeah, if I guess the audience have the same mindset as me, I'm sure they wouldn't either, because the session was that good. So let's wait for like a minute. If there are no questions, we can wind up.
Absolutely.
Great. So Chetan, I'm going to assume that the